This peaceful, poetic image of the Earth seen from space is misleading. Powerful telluric forces are constantly perturbing the planet. Magnificent volcanoes and tumultuous oceans, clashing over millions of years, have created dazzling archipelagos. Borne by winds and currents, we're setting sail for one of these breathtakingly beautiful islands. This expedition boat is the Spitsbergen. It's sailing the North Atlantic, heading for Iceland. The natural riches of this island, anchored on the edge of the Arctic Circle, attract a growing number of travelers.
It's the first time I've been sailing around Iceland. It will be exciting to explore it, and this trade is very interesting.
Setting out from Reykjavik, the country's capital, we will, day after day, sail up deep fjords surrounded by fortresses of lava, cross valleys bristling with craters, climb glaciers and crawl into the bowels of the Earth to feel its heartbeat. An adventure at the heart of a mysterious island, the land of volcanoes, Iceland. Six o'clock in the morning, the boat arrives in Reykjavik, the most northerly capital in the world. It's spring, and at this latitude, day breaks around 3 o'clock.
Tight up the bow lines. All lines tight.
Boarding for the cruise doesn't begin until the end of the day. Meanwhile, we hit the road with Helga, a young volcanologist. When we asked her to drive us to the place that best expresses the geology of her island, her answer was immediate. Thingvellir.
It's a very young country. You can study the origin of Earth here. You see the processes happening in front of you.
The clash of the large continental plates drifting on the surface of the globe causes earthquakes and fractures the Earth's crust. The Thingvellir rift that crosses Iceland from side to side is like an open book that tells of its birth.
If you look at the map of the Atlantic Ocean, you have the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and then all of a sudden we have Iceland. The existence of Iceland is due to a mantle plume that is below, providing all the magma that forms Iceland.
Subjected to the opposing forces of the North American and Eurasian tectonic plates, the many volcanoes that lie along this gigantic fault can erupt at any time. For the volcanologist, the Thingvellir Rift is much more than a magnificent landscape. It's an open-air laboratory where they can study the movements of the Earth's crust.
Yeah, we're walking around the wall of the rift. So on my left, we would have the North American plate. Then 7 kilometers away, we have the boundary for the Eurasian plate. And between these two walls, we have a rift valley. It's sort of a white lie that you can touch two continents unless you have like 7 kilometers long hands. But yeah, we're sort of in a no man's land. The newest land is formed in Europe.
There's a touch of the supernatural about the Thingvellir Rift. Is it because they saw in it the strength of Odin that the Vikings came to the island in the 9th century, decided to make it one of the symbols of their power? Perhaps. Today as yesterday, this place is fascinating and still has plenty of surprises in store.
Still active, and it will continue to be active. So the Atlantic Ridge spreads 2 centimeters every year on average. If this rifting would continue for millions and millions of years, it will of course grow larger, the island. But if the mantle plume would all of a sudden stop providing material, magma, it would eventually, technically, become two different islands.
On a human scale, geological time looks more like eternity. The movements of the Thingvellir Rift are imperceptible. Those, on the other hand, which roar in the Geysir subsoil, to which Helger is taking us, are far more spectacular.
When a lot of surface water accumulates in the crust, flash heats up due to cooling intrusion or magma, and then bursts into a bubble on the surface. This one goes off every 6 to 10 minutes. It takes a long time for the geyser to reactivate. Look at the rain.
It's spring. The sun shines for almost 18 hours a day. It's like a rebirth for the residents of Reykjavik. The Spitsbergen is preparing to cast off. While the last passengers embark and the final formalities are carried out, Herman, the mechanical engineer, returns to the engine room, the beating heart of the ship. Over the next 2 weeks, the boat will land in some extreme regions. Everything must be in working order.
Do we have enough water and electricity? Yeah. Okay, ready for departure.
Stand by. Operative.
A few decks higher up, on the bridge, the captain is ready for the maneuver.
Then we are ready.
We are leaving Reykjavik. The adventure begins. For many, Iceland has long been an island lost somewhere in the cold waters of the North Atlantic. But in March 2010, the seismographs panic, and the eyes of the world turn to Iceland. Eyjafjallajokull erupts. Lava flows through an opening in one of its flanks. Several days later, the volcano enters a second, much more violent eruptive phase. It projects gigantic quantities of gas, ash, and slag into the atmosphere. The eruption lasted over 2 months, and then one day, Eyjafjallajokull dozed off. What can the crater of this sleeping monster look like? Will Hilmar's powerful 4x4 be able to lift us up the slopes of the slag-covered volcano?
The glacier has been there all my life, and seeing the big ash cloud coming out of it, yes, it was amazing.
The climb is long and chaotic. Soon we spot the first snow patches.
After the eruption, the biggest changes in the actual crater, and now that site that we used to see just looks completely different. Instead of being glacial white and blue, it's now just rocks and boulders.
After an hour's drive, we finally reach the summit, 1,666 meters above sea level.
Fantastic. This over here is where the crater starts, and now we have a crevasse over here, so we won't go any further. In 2010, when we had the big eruption, all of this was completely flat from one side to the other. It was just a plateau filled with ice.
The thermal shock between the magma at 1,000 degrees and the glacier that caps the peak feeds a gigantic cloud of ash that soon rises to an altitude of more than 10 kilometers, taking over the skies of Europe and totally paralyzing air traffic.
Because of this volcano, it put us on the map. Everybody realized that there was an island there in the North Atlantic Ocean. This is my happy place. The feeling you get up here, the peace, the quiet, it's just, you're alone with the nature. It's unique.
We have sailed northwards during the night. In the early hours, we sight Stykkishólmur. On the bridge, it's a waiting game. The pilot who should help the captain to enter the port has not turned up.
I did not reshape order. I thought that...
This is a skipper's first arrival in this port, and without the pilot's expertise, it may be fairly complicated.
Pilot is not answering. We have tried to call him, but maybe he's sleeping.
I can come if you want.
Det är grejt för oss.
No, that's okay. We will probably do that.
The channel is very narrow, but with the help of radar, the captain slowly guides his ship inside the port. Surrounded by his officers, joystick in hand, controlling the power of the engines, the captain docks smoothly. "15 minutes later, the ship's 100 meters glide alongside the quay as if on parade. Mission accomplished. From the port of Stykkishólmur, the road sets off to tackle a landscape of great power. Dizzying waterfalls, black sand beaches battered by white foaming waves. The entire Snaefellsnes Peninsula was sculpted by the combined forces of sea and volcanoes. Alan, our driver, was born here. This mysterious land is his garden, and he still talks of it with passion.
When you drive around Snaefellsnes Peninsula, you're gonna see how the float was, how it looks like when it was melting down. And just imagine if you've been here and look at that about 3,000 years ago. It was amazing.
Over time, the moss and lichen typical of northern climes have gradually colonized the lava fields.
You're gonna see it. If it's gonna be flat, that means the underground, everything was quite hot. But it was getting colder when it gets, started to get bigger.
Alan isn't a scientist, but he knows every nook and cranny of his region. He loves to show visitors around and has a weakness for a little volcano barely 100 meters tall.
Saxhol is like a typical false crater. So it just erupted one time, around 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. Like a big bomb, just for a couple hours or something, just big explosion.
The entire tip of the Snaefellsnes Peninsula is a national park. Dozens of little craters stand out in the middle of this vast lava plain, as if a meteor shower had just rained down. The volcanoes are creators, working not only in the light of day, but also in the darkness of the depths. Helgi is one of the volcanologist guides at the Eyjafjallajokull cave.
We're standing in a lava tube that was created in an eruption roughly 8,000 years ago. This was a massive eruption. Lava rivers were flowing all over the place, digging their way into the ground, forming tubes and tunnels, caves like these ones. Right now we're in the deepest section of the cave, about 35 meters under the surface. And this section is called Center. And the name is, of course, referring to Jules Verne's story, Journey to the Center of the Earth.
Jules Verne never set foot in Iceland. His story is imaginary and scientifically fanciful. But it shows that in the 19th century, when volcanology was still in its infancy, Iceland was already famed for its volcanoes. We set to sea again. This time, the captain has set a course for the fjord region in the extreme northwest of the country. As the route followed is off the beaten track, the navigation officers seize the opportunity to take a few readings and update the charts.
Security is our highest priority, so this is important to do, and it's also very good training to get to know where we are sailing, because you're working with the map all the time instead of just having it on the screen.
Iceland is a land of contrast, its landscapes not carved by the actions of volcanoes alone. As the glaciers withdrew at the end of the Quaternary about 12,000 years ago, they gave birth to deep fjords surrounded by high mountains. Those indefatigable sculptors, the sea, the wind, and the rivers, added the final touch to these grandiose landscapes. The fish-rich waters of the Arctic have long been the country's only resource. Hundreds of little fishing villages nestle in the shelter of the fjords. Asleep on the shores of the past, they awake only when cruise ships arrive for a stopover. For long hours, we are going to penetrate the secret world of fjords. The captain has dropped anchor in Reykjavik, the fjord in the mist in Icelandic. This little village, today almost deserted, once lived by recovering wood from Siberia, borne here by the currents. In a land where trees are almost non-existent, wood is a very precious commodity.
No, keep the speed up so we get in further.
A stopover in this wild bay, far from the world, offers passengers the chance of a unique experience. Everyone makes the most of their day at the heart of nature, even the captain.
We have to look to what to say.
We have to explore.
Yes, when we have time.
The passengers, meanwhile, pay homage to another typically Icelandic tradition, natural hot baths at 35 degrees centigrade.
There's hot water everywhere. Nature really is extraordinary.
You don't feel like you're on Earth. It's more like the moon.
And this mix of snow, hot water, and volcanoes is really impressive.
The skipper gives the order to weigh anchor. The boat will now retrace its wake farther north into the dark glacial waters of the Arctic Ocean. We will soon arrive in the country's most active volcanic region. Iceland boasts more than 200 volcanoes. Some of them are permanently watched. That's the job of the Icelandic Meteorology Office, where a volcanologist, Sara Barsotti, works.
In Iceland, there are more than 32 active volcanoes. This means volcanoes that have been erupted in the last 10,000 years and that could potentially erupt again in the near future. The last eruption in Iceland was Bardarbunga 2014-2015. 6 months of lava flows and a lot of volcanic gas emitted that have been affecting the country, Europe as well.
Each week, Sara logs several hundred seismic movements throughout the country.
This is what we call the normal status of Iceland, that is very active, but it is just knowing the background that then we can identify when things start to change. In Iceland, we have an eruption each 4 or 5 years. We are really getting close to the next one. But again, guess which one will be? We don't know. We need to monitor all of them as much as we can.
So it'll come down to whether Mother Nature gives us an eruption during this trip. In the meantime, we continue sailing along the northern coast towards Akureyri. After a long ascent of the fjord, we sight the northern capital. This large town opens the door to the Myvatn region. With the captain's permission, we're going to leave the ship to go and explore this mecca for volcanism.
We will leave the ship for 3 days and visit these volcanoes and come back again on board in Seyðisfjörður. It's here on the east coast of Iceland. You're welcome on board, always.
While the captain prepares the next leg of his voyage around Iceland, we head off towards Myvatn. After crossing the whole country, the mid-Atlantic ridge that we left in Thingvellir reappears here, even more spectacular and more active. Volcanoes, solfataras, hot water springs, lava fields. To volcanologists, Myvatn is the promised land. For this reason, after graduating, Julia and Helgi, these 2 young geologists, decided to leave Reykjavik and come and live here. We meet them inside a crater. And not just any crater. Krafla, one of the country's most active volcanoes.
It's one of the bigger craters here that erupted 30 years ago. From this spot here, the magma was shooting up in the air up to 20-30 meters, and then falling back around the crater here, creating an ocean of lava flowing towards the north.
A lunar landscape. The comparison returns like a leitmotif since the Apollo 11 astronauts came to train here.
We have rocks and craters, we have clays and the mud pots, the geothermal areas. This is very close to the moon environment. So this is a perfect spot to practice moonwalk.
For Julia, who keeps her feet on the ground, this place is, above all, a fantastic research laboratory.
There are some fumaroles here with sulfur accumulating around them. So if we take a closer look, the more orange and red here are microbes that are eating the sulfur as food. These are microbes that like the heat. This is similar as the first life on Earth. It emerged around fumaroles, but on the ocean floor.
Over the centuries, the mineral fireworks that accompany each of Krafla's eruptions eventually gave birth to an astonishing work of art, abstract, giant, and colorful.
The bright yellow is the native sulfur, and the gray color is when the sulfur has interacted with the iron from the rock. The mud pools are increasing gas, dissolving more and more of the rocks, making it like a soup of chemicals. People need to be very cautious when approaching areas like this because the rocks are being dissolved. Acid can actually make little caves underneath. We cannot see it at the surface, and then suddenly we can fall through. We cannot get burned because it is 100 degrees. We see the boiling.
Underneath us, at approximately 3 kilometers depth, is an ocean of magma. We can be pretty sure that in the next 200-300 years, we will have a series of big eruptions here in Krafla, because this is the area where we have the most movement between the continents.
When we think about what is lying underneath, it sometimes feels a little bit crazy standing here.
In the 13th century, the Vikings enjoyed the hot springs and baked bread on hot stones. But it wasn't until the 20th century and the 1970s oil crisis that Iceland exploited on a large scale the heat contained in its subsoil. This futuristic construction rising up in a desert of stone is Krafla, one of the country's 5 geothermal power plants. While continuing to explore the volcanic sites of the region, the 2 geologists carry out their research inside the plant itself. Harnessing the heat contained in the depths of the Earth is not done without risks. They therefore regularly check the water pressure of each of the 18 boreholes at the plant.
We're gonna measure the pressure on this one.
At a depth of 2,000 meters, the groundwater heats up in contact with the burning hot rocks. By the time it reaches the surface, its temperature is higher than 200 degrees centigrade.
Here we have a 5-bar. Power of the volcano. This was the steam and water that is going into the power station, producing the electricity and hot water for the community.
"95% of Icelandic homes are now heated by geothermal science. A miraculous natural resource for this tiny land of 350,000 inhabitants. Helgi and Julia have a laboratory inside the power plant. And that's where, throughout the year, they patiently analyze hundreds of water samples from the drill sites.
Shall we start the machine up and...
Yes. We'll measure the dissolved gases in the samples, the CO2 and the H2S. Okay, you can start.
Start.
The geologist must ensure that the sulfur content of the water does not damage the plant's facilities, among other things.
By monitoring the gas chemistry, we can not only follow up the geothermal system, we can also check what the magma chamber is doing.
If we would see a major shift in CO2 in the boreholes, we would be worried. That would be a volcanic sign of there would be a new magma intrusion in the system.
Everything is normal. We are not expecting any eruption soon.
Appearances are deceptive. This green landscape that crosses a peaceful river is a very fragile Eden. Everybody knows that the forces asleep under the thin crust of the earth will eventually awaken. But nobody can say where or when. As we continue our exploration of the Myvatn region, the captain has resumed his route along the northern coast of Iceland. At 66 degrees 37 minutes latitude north, we have just entered the Arctic Circle. Sometimes frequented by whales, the cold, nutrient-rich waters attract large colonies of birds. After a long stay in the southern hemisphere, they migrate to Iceland as soon as spring arrives. Several days of cruising and discovery have sparked the passengers' curiosity. Dominic, one of the expedition scientists, holds a geology workshop to answer their questions.
Here there's two rock specimens that I collected yesterday from the Berserk lava field outside Stikkiholma. You can see that these were very gassy eruptions, so we have lots and lots of bubbles.
Observation of the rock under a microscope tells us a little more about its history.
But as you can see here, we're looking at the inside of one of these gas bubbles, but you can see that it's been dragged out. So we'd say that the lava was moving in this direction.
Some passengers are fascinated by the mysteries of the infinitely small. Others climb aboard a speedboat to get close to the diversity and power of nature.
We've a good chance of seeing fulmars, which are here, as well as thick-billed murres and black guillemots.
It's fabulous. Look at that. Just look at the rock. It's fantastic. It's unique to see millions of birds together in such a small perimeter, flying above our heads. That cliff is untouched by human hand. It's as it was centuries ago.
For the passengers, the time has come to return to the ship. The voyage is far from over, and there are some nice surprises in store. 8 o'clock in the morning. We meet up with Julia and Helgi. Our two volcanologists are strangely silent. What mystery lies at the end of this long road that crosses the landscape? The Gratiata Cave, used to shoot one of the most famous scenes on Game of Thrones, is directly linked to the Krafla volcano.
During the Krafla fires, this water got heated up to almost 60 degrees. Before the Krafla fires, people used to bathe here and wash themselves, but it was not possible after the Krafla fire started.
The water temperature has gradually gone down over time, but it remains very high indeed.
Yeah, it's very hot. It's about 45 degrees. I would not bathe in it, but some people can.
During these episodes of activity within the Krafla volcano, here the ground is moving very dramatically away, splitting up in earthquakes. So this area here is always moving. These caves get bigger and bigger.
In Myvatn, curiosities come in pairs. This volcano, with a practically perfect shape, this impressive crater, is that of Verfell. For the two enthusiasts guiding us, this is Iceland's most beautiful volcano. Verfell is rather like Krafla's child. It was born following a very powerful eruption of Krafla around 3,000 years ago.
Hverfjall crater was formed by magma flowing from the Krafla volcano.
The torrents of lava discharged by Krafla penetrated the crevices of the Earth's crust. They ended up resurfacing in the middle of Myvatn Lake, which was much larger at the time.
The water caused the lava to explode again and again and again until it built up this big crater. If this event would happen again, all of this area would have to be evacuated, because when you have the magma exploding through water like this, you have pyroclastic flows going frequently down the side, and it's 200 degrees in temperature. So people would be in great danger here.
No worries for the moment, but beware. The giant may be sleeping with one eye open. Krafla is a great architect. Over the course of its outbursts, it has dried up lakes, designed lava fields, and modeled dozens of craters. Despite their appearance, some of them are totally harmless.
These craters, they are rootless, which means they do not have a magma feeding system themselves, but are formed when lava flows on top of a water.
We pick one of the rocks up here. You can actually see that this is what we call broken glass. This is basaltic glass. This only forms when the basaltic lava cools down very rapidly, and you need water to do so. If you would cut it very thin, it would be a see-through like a window. Don't see this very often in nature, where you have a lava-water interaction, you know, far away from the eruption. We are talking about, we are now here, 300–400 5 kilometers away. So it's a very beautiful phenomenon.
After weathering the fog and storms of the Sea of Darkness, by landing on this island, the Vikings thought they had conquered all perils. They hadn't reckoned with the earthquakes and volcanoes. At a time when the natural powers were the equal of the gods, Iceland became a land of saga and legend. Nicknamed the Dark Castles, these lava flows cooled by the waters of the lake were considered the gateway to hell. Kilometers separate us from Seyðisfjörður, the port where our boat awaits. The road winds through landscapes of astonishing beauty. The Esbergi Canyon, work of Odin for the Vikings, was sculpted by a lahar, a glacial outburst flood. 100 meters wide and 44 high, the powerful Dettifoss waterfall sits in a canyon of basalt columns located on the mid-Atlantic ridge. At the end of the day, the final difficulty was in crossing, in bitter cold, the pass that affords access to the little port of Seyðisfjörður. Boarding the Spitsbergen again felt a little like coming home. Without further ado, the skipper casts off and leaves the fjord, some 20 kilometers long, rejoins the open sea and sets a course for Vestmannaeyja, or the Westman Islands. In the early morning, a few islands appear at the bow of the ship. There are around 20 Westman Islands. Most are still untouched by any human presence. The passengers are on deck to observe these strange volcanic promontories where bird colonies nest. The captain slowly approaches Surtsey, a geological curiosity located at the southern tip of the archipelago. November 14th, 1963, in the roar of an underwater volcanic eruption, Surtsey appears on the surface of the ocean. By the time the volcano ceases its activity 4 years later, the island measures 173 meters high and has the shape that we see today.
This extraordinary island is 56 years old. It's younger than me, a newborn baby. Seeing an island that's just been born is magnificent. It's moving. This is a living land. It's evolving daily.
Despite the erosion that threatens it, scientists are not worried about Surtsey. It should live another few 100 million years. We move away from Surtsey, heading for the final stopover of this cruise. Heimaey, largest of the islands in the Westman archipelago. While southern Iceland has experienced intense volcanic activity for hundreds of thousands of years, Heimaey emerged from the ocean only 10,000 years ago. In other words, yesterday on the geological scale. This peaceful island bears no trace of the drama it experienced in 1973. A terrible eruption that almost erased it from the map. The entrance to the harbor is spectacular. The boat must take a narrow channel surrounded by steep cliffs. The maneuver is delicate, and the captain appreciates the presence on board of the pilot. Streets drawn at right angles, cubic houses placed on bright green lawns. Heimaey is a peaceful town. The scars of the tragedy that was played out here are still firmly rooted, both in the landscape and in the minds of the inhabitants. The harbor pilot hasn't forgotten that time.
I was here when this happened.
Okay.
10 years old.
Okay.
Yeah.
It is over there.
Yeah, you see the water breaker there?
Yes.
It was just open sea before the volcano. Yeah.
The lava flow that came to die just inside the port bears witness to the violence of the eruption. More than 5,000 people were living on Heimaey, and many left after the disaster. In 1973, Ilnor was 8 years old. Her dad was a firefighter and photographer. The 5 months of volcanic eruption that hit Heimaey then are forever etched in her memory.
I remember everything like it happened yesterday, because it's very stuck in your memory what happened that night. My father was a fire worker, and the phone was ringing in the night, and they were telling him that something happened, some fire they saw in the mountain.
It is 2 o'clock in the morning. Lava fountains are springing up several hundred meters high from a fissure 2 kilometers long. The volcano Eldfell is being born. The lava flows are heading toward the dwellings. The whole island could catch fire. Heimaey's 5,000 inhabitants must be evacuated urgently.
My father said we have to go all together, but he will stay because he was supposed to be rescuing everything here.
In just 4 hours, the whole population of the island was evacuated. Just 500 men remain on Heimaey to try and protect and save anything that can be saved. 2 weeks after the start of the eruption, the volcano continues to vomit torrents of lava day and night. All eyes are on the harbor.
The main fear of the lava will close the harbor, because the harbor is the main reason for this island lives on fish. So that was very important to stop this lava going.
The firefighters attempt the impossible with the help of the U.S. Navy. Pumping ships shower the lava front with seawater in an epic operation. After 3 weeks fighting and some 6 million tons of water sprayed, the lava flow is contained. The harbor is saved. The eruption of Eldfell lasted 5 months. It leaves behind it a town half destroyed, covered with a thick layer of ash and volcanic rock. When she returns to her island when the eruption is finished, the little girl doesn't recognize a thing. A new mountain stands above the town.
When I went this night, we had a little fire here. When I came back 8 months later, it was another mountain, Eldfell. It means fire mountain.
In a few weeks, the eruption of Eldfell spilled several million cubic meters of lava, and the island reclaimed nearly 2 square kilometers from the sea. The volcano, still active, is now side by side with its big brother, Helgafell, 6,000 years dormant.
We we can have a new eruption tomorrow. We don't know. We live on that island, you know. We have to have hope. And it's important that we think about the future, not the past. It's a wonderful island, you can see that.
Icelanders have preserved the close ties that their ancestor Vikings had woven with the powers of nature. Away from the shipping routes and the din of the modern world, this mysterious island jealously protects its treasures. Sheltered by wild coasts, battered by waves and wind, landscapes of incredible purity unfold. Gigantic waterfalls, thundering geysers, mineral deserts, and volcanoes, hundreds of volcanoes. Each of their eruptions reminds us that the Earth is a living being and must be respected. Icelanders and travelers, we are all guardians of this beautiful island that nature has given us as a legacy.